I'm honored this morning to share with you a bit about the approach toward tithing in our family. And I feel a little bit like holding up a checkbook or something, which I don't want to be doing. So I feel a little awkward, but I've been asked to share, and I'm very glad to. As I look back at my growing up, my grandpa Brumback, Jim Brumback, after whom I was named, talked a great deal to me about the importance of tithing, and about the importance of the promises of God. And one of his favorite verses was Malachi 3, verse 10, "Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I do not open up the floodgates of heaven and pour out so many blessings that you will not have room enough for it." And so the Brumback family, my mother's side of the family, were very oriented toward the idea of tithing. I remember Uncle Charlie once made the comment, "I love to pay more taxes and I wish I could pay more tithe," because there's only one thing that would bring that about. On the other hand, my father's side of the family, the Gentrys, we lived out in the country. We attended a small Southern Baptist church. Because it was in the country, it only met every 2 weeks. And there I heard kind of a different thing. A lot of it had to do with paying the preacher. And the focus seemed to be away from the church, but on the preacher. And the whole approach toward giving was, when the plate came by, give $1 or $2. And so I also want to point out that I became a Christian at 11, and so I kind of grown up in the church and really had not perhaps taken the focus on tithing. It was sometimes seen as kind of an Old Testament idea, and we were under grace, and the idea was to try to keep the preacher happy, get enough money, and that was about it. When I moved to Portland, Oregon in 1968 and started teaching at a small Christian college, Cascade College, Barb and I met in the young single Sunday school class at First Baptist Church in Portland. And when we got married, and Barb, who had become a Christian around 21, 22, her approach was a little different than mine. And I must say that she led me in a very positive direction. And so over time, we did commit ourselves to tithing. And then a few years later, after being CSI for a while, the question came up about tithing the gross versus tithing the net. And I don't know about your paycheck, but my gross and net look very different. Partly at CSI, it was a retirement system for which I'm very glad I contributed now. But anyway, on faith, we decided to tithe the gross. And that was an important decision. And again, as I feel a little uncomfortable even talking about this, because this is something we don't usually go around and chat about. But I wanted to say that I think that the issue of treasure in Luke 12:34, Jesus talks about where your heart is, where your treasure is. And maybe another way of saying that in the modern world for me is that your heart is where your investments are. And then the other thing about Malachi 3:10 that struck me as I was looking at this in more detail, because we generally hear the first part of the verse about bringing your whole tithe in the storehouse, and said, and see if I will open up the floodgates and pour out so much blessing. And I think a lot of times we see that blessing as money. And I think in some cases it's money, but I think in many cases it's not. And I won't spend too much time talking about what a blessing you guys are to me, because our biological family is not twin falls, putting it mildly. And so there's so many blessings that we have. And just the last verse in I just read in my devotions a few days ago, and I think it fit in so well. It says, "For the love of money," this is 1 Timothy 6:10, For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. And it seemed to me like that in giving to the Lord, He has promised blessing, and blessing we have been abundantly hit with. But also this love of money, and He's not talking about money. Money obviously is a very handy thing to have around. But that sometimes we have trouble giving up. And last week, just love that little clip on the donuts. You know, the guy gives the guy a dozen donuts and then wants one back, and the guy doesn't want to let those loose. And I have to admit, I can relate to that. Sometimes I don't want to let loose either. But the blessings of the Lord, and Barb and I, one of our great blessings is that at the end of November, we both lived that long. We would have been married 45 years. And what a blessing.